Welcome to Lingua Franca. By now, you have probably studied how to form regular conjugations in the preterite, as well as its small group of stem changers. Not bad, right? Well, now for the next big step with respect to the preterite, the irregulars. When we first look at this list of irregular forms in the preterite, it seems a bit daunting. Yes, many of these verbs had, shall we say, peculiarities in the present tense. But with the preterite, things get wild and crazy, or so it seems. But the truth is that we can group them into three main groups, or patterns, that exist when we conjugate them in the preterite. These groupings are based on the thematic vowel or consonant, an I group, a J group, and a U group. There are also a couple of irregulars that do some really funky things in the preterite, so we'll look at them too. Overall, regardless of the pattern, all irregular preterite forms have certain things in common. Their endings are a combination of the AR and ER-IR endings, and there is a complete lack of accent marks. Yeah. We made a big deal about the usage of accent marks in part 1 of this series on the preterite, and for good reason. But we are in the land of irregularity, where the rule is, if it's irregular, it will break some rules. Ain't language fun? Okay, first up is the I group. This is a really small set of our buddies, querer, venir, and hacer. That's it. We use these stems and the endings to form the preterite for these verbs. The I group has a much less radical change than the other groups, just an E changing to an I. Hacer does have one more change, but it's a spelling change. In the third person singular, él, ella, usted, this is a C changing to a Z, just to ensure that the same sound is being used. As you can see, these are distinctly preterite verbs. There is nothing present tense about them. The U group is a very radical change in the vowel of the stem, with a U showing up unexpectedly. In some of these verbs, there's also a consonant change. Both the U group and the I group share the same endings. If you notice, all of these verbs have some sort of quirk in the present tense too, with the exception of caber and andar. Using them in Spanish is again very straightforward, and they very clearly are not present tense forms. The J group all have J's in their preterite root. It's a fairly radical change and is directly related to the forms of their ancestors in Latin. This group has essentially the same endings, with the exception of the third person plural, which is missing the I. Again, their form makes them highly distinctive in comparison to the present tense. There can be no confusion here. Last but not least, we get to the funky forms, because there have to be some, right? Naturally, ser and ir are here. But I bet you were not expecting this. Yep, ser and ir share the same preterite form. So how can you tell which verb is being used? Context. Since they mean very different actions, or lack thereof in the case of ser, there is no way to confuse the meanings. There is a reason for this, and it's a bit of a long story. Suffice it to say that in Latin, these verbs were very, very funky. and this funkiness merged over the course of history. We may cover this in a future Patreon-backed video. But wait, that's not all. Dar also is part of this funky party. Despite being an AR verb, it uses endings that look remarkably similar to ER, IR endings. Of course, it is missing accent marks because it's an irregular verb. I don't know about you, but I would say these three verbs are certifiably funky. As we mentioned in many of the other videos, and especially in part 1 of this Preterite series, practice really does make perfect. Or perhaps it's best to say that practice makes this easier to remember. There are a number of tutorial sites with great exercises to help you in learning these Preterite verb forms. If you go to lenguafranca.us, you will see a number of them listed on our resources page. Please like the video and leave any comments or questions that you have. Don't forget to subscribe to Lengua Franca's YouTube channel, which has more videos on Spanish grammar and much more. Oh, and please check out our Patreon page if you are at all interested in supporting us in our work. Hasta pronto. Adiós.